Hi there, this is Katie Groves, and this is part 34, I think, in my series about deprogramming from trauma-based mind control. If you have not done so already, I ask that you please watch the first two parts of this series, linked in the description below, for disclaimers and safety measures you can take while watching these videos. In this video, I'm going to be talking about rapid splitting programs. And in an effort not to repeat myself, I ask that you please watch a few videos that I've already done in this series that I will link in the description below, specifically parts 30 through 33 and preventing reaccessing part 2. I also go in depth into my personal experience with a type of rapid splitting program I call splitting factory programming, and that has to do with my exponential fragmentation that I experienced in the mind control. It's a very specific type of programming that may not apply to everyone or even most people who've undergone trauma-based mind control, but if you have, or think you may have, I definitely recommend watching that video if you feel safe to. I'll put a link to that in the description below. So, what new information can I provide here? I'll say some things I've said before about other types of programs, but I'll try to bring something new to this video about rapid splitting. So, like with other programs, it's important for me to recognize with a rapid splitting program that it is driven by terror. It is driven by a core dissociative part or parts of the subsystem experiencing the program that are in a state of panic and reliving trauma. And this is especially palpable for me with rapid splitting because it's a very extreme reaction to split continuously or to split nonstop. It's a very intense reaction to trauma, one that for me has been greatly aided, greatly encouraged by programming installed by programmers back when I was in the mind control, but one that does have its basis in a genuine need to run from the terror of the trauma that is being relived. So I've found with rapid splitting programs, the trauma is often worse than what I would normally see in a program. It's some of my most violent trauma that tends to cause it. So it's important for me to know that going in, any attempts to deprogram this kind of program, I may find myself in touch with very difficult trauma. So it's important for me to call on my inner resources and find inner dissociative parts that are particularly strong and particularly capable of handling trauma before I go in. Once I have been able to successfully neutralize the rapid splitting programs and am looking at the system, mapping it, talking to inner system leaders, parts of the system that know more of what's going on, I tend to find that the inner system leaders were temporarily unaware of their system and unaware of its previous function before it was put into the rapid splitting. I find that these alters were temporarily taken out of touch with themselves and their purpose and thrust into the splitting as well. And so what I mean to say is that I find that the rapid splitting is meant to destroy not only the lower ranking alters of the subsystem, but it's often meant to scramble and mess up the entire organization of the system by targeting its leaders as well as its lower ranking members. And what that is usually indicative of, in my experience, is there was some kind of rebellion in the system, meaning that the subsystem became conscious of the mind control and started trying to deprogram. Perhaps this is something that came up in the context of my deprogramming process. That is kind of what this video is supposed to be about, is when this comes up in the context of deprogramming. So, say I am deprogramming myself and I trigger something inside, something that's booby-trapped with rapid splitting. It will split the parts up into little pieces so that they cannot ground themselves or connect. it's often used in conjunction with scrambling. It's to prevent deprogramming. But it often happened to me while I was in the mind control and not so in touch with the deprogramming process. Systems would wake up and they would start trying to do something before the conscious mind was ever aware that we had been programmed. Deeper level systems would try to do something to wake us up, and those parts would get put into scrambling and splitting programs. So it's something I've experienced all throughout my time as a mind-controlled slave, long before I was really consciously trying to deprogram myself. So it's important for me to know what triggered it. And that's something that I can only typically find out. Sorry for the background noise. Garbage truck. Sorry for that also. It's typically something I can only find out once I've neutralized the system. And so once I've done so, I can find out what caused the splitting and find out how long ago it started. Because oftentimes what happens is I become co-conscious with a system that has been rapid splitting for a long time. Through deprogramming, I happen upon a new system and I find myself thrust into the rapid splitting that has been going on for some time. So it's important for me to know when it was caused. Was it triggered by something that just happened in my process, or did I just become aware of something that had been going on for some time? And then once I find out what caused it, it's important for me to work with each part of the system individually and collectively, however is appropriate and necessary, to help the parts understand what happened, understand what mind control is, if they're old enough to. The really small parts, like I've said in previous videos, we tend to deal with separately in different ways that are a lot easier. We may not give them much of a mental picture of what the mind control looked like. It may be very simple how we talk to them and simply say things like, we explain that bad people tried to take their power away, and we explain what that means in very simple terms. Those are things that those alters can usually understand. We connect them to a heart place and teach them that their heart center is their source of power and that they became unaware of it so that they could be easily manipulated by people who wanted to do them harm. And that's something we don't say in those exact words, but that's the gist of it. But if they're older, we go in depth into what the mind control programming is, however is appropriate and necessary for those parts to understand what happened. And we do this so that they understand that it was not their fault. So they have a sense of control, so that they have a sense of power over themselves, and so that they start connecting the dots of what happened to them and start connecting with each other. We teach them a common language so that they can interact, so that they can connect and share experiences and share memories, and start the integration process. This is something that we do, I should note, after we restructure their inner world so that their inner world looks and feels safe for them, so that they are not trapped in whatever violent or painful inner space they were in, a space that may have encouraged them to split and encouraged them to experience trauma. So we make their inner world safe. This may mean taking them to other inner worlds, but if possible, we keep them all in the same place so that they can heal as a subsystem, because these are alters that have been trauma bonded to each other in the programming, and it is important for us, if possible, to use those bonds to reshape their relationship with each other and give them a sense of safety in that bonding instead of a sense of trauma and fear, so that it's not a survival-driven bond anymore, but we take these already existing bonds and transform them. We help these alters transform the bonds into loving, heart-conscious bonds. They can end up being very, very strong as a result of what they previously were. But if that's not possible for some reason, if parts are in contention with each other, especially if the alters are extremely young and can't conceptualize the mind control, we then will break them up to whatever degree necessary and take them into healing centers of our system. We have inner worlds dedicated to reintegration and healing, where we'll have teams of inner deprogrammers and inner healers that work with the parts in whatever organization is necessary to make sure that the parts are able to let go of and or process their trauma, depending on their age and capabilities, and reintegrate or find a new task for the system. It's important for us to reassign tasks. Once alters have been removed from their original function in the programming, it's important for us to find new things for them to do if they are not ready or able to integrate yet, or if perhaps we need them. And I think it's important to note another thing about deprogramming that helps us, and now we're not talking so much about rapid splitting, but just deprogramming in general. Another thing that really helps us in that process with these parts in inner healing worlds and figuring out what to do with them is to figure out what part of the core self they hold and were once connected to before they split off into their programmed function. So I talk about what they were originally programmed for, but before they were programmed, what did they do? And we were programmed from birth, so this can be really difficult. But for example, I have alters who were hidden, who we preserved through play when we were 4 years old. This is just one example I'm thinking of. And these alters stayed hidden in interdissociative worlds for some time before they were found and before they were taken out of those worlds and reprogrammed for other functions, or programmed for the first time, I mean to say, for other functions. So they were no longer allowed to live carefree lives inside based on actual physical memories we had of play. And so when I go to deprogram these parts who come from that, it's important for me to trace them, help them remember, help them access those core memories of playing, those core memories of having safety in the system. Sorry, it's really itchy. Those core memories of having safety in the system. Those core memories of whatever physical activity they were doing that grounded them, whatever the memory was from which their inner world was based. And then help them to connect to those positive feelings. Help them also to work through the betrayal and the loss of having been ripped out of themselves and forced into the programming. This is a long process, but it's something that's helped us tremendously. Some parts, their programming lineage, as in, like when you look at their history of having been programmed, you'll see that they were taken from one program into another, reprogrammed continuously from maybe, let's say, 1 year old. That can be really hard to connect them back with any mental sense of who they were before the programming, but I can still usually trace back, I can always trace back a part, it seems, to an early childhood space of connection. That every part had an origin or an identity before they were programmed, even if we were programmed at 1 day old. Even though we were influenced in programming while we were in the womb. Even if we have to go back and connect to something from a past life, our spiritual evolution did not begin with Monarch mind control. There's always a place we can go to beyond and before the mind control that can help us to connect with a real sense of self that's not rooted in it. So those are some valuable things for me. I'm an alter that just has dealt with the rapid splitting programs a lot, but I wanted to share some extra things about deprogramming, and I think that's something that we will start doing more in our deprogramming videos, because the basic mechanics of deprogramming each of these types of programs we're focusing on are often so similar. We don't want to be repetitive. I think it's best if we start letting the alters give their unique perspectives on deprogramming, as well as sharing what they've learned about the specific types of deprogramming the videos are meant to focus on. Okay, that's all I've got. Thank you.